and she was sort of unsettled by these Christian symbols and said, perhaps we'd like to see a picture of the human genome. Perhaps that would be preferable to a giant cross. And I like what you say. A human genome? Is that what's going to give you comfort if you're dying of cancer in those last days of your life? But that is one story about Christopher Hitchens, isn't it?
Well, yes, and that's the height of atheistic irony and just insanity, really, because they objected to the cross over the door. The cross they objected to. They thought somehow it showed that the hospital wasn't as focused as much as it should on medical things. Well, but they forgot the main thing itself, which was that the hospital itself was a Christian hospital, paid for by Christian dollars, funded by Christians. So the hospital that he was receiving care from was Christian, and he was receiving compassionate care. But of course they overlooked that incredible irony and just focused on the fact that there was a cross on the wall. This is typical of their ignorance and shallowness.
Well, let's, if we can, tell the other story. And I'm more familiar with him than maybe some others because I'm a little bit older than some of our listeners, but Anthony Flew. Matter of fact, I mentioned just a minute ago Norm Geisler, and he had a chance to debate Anthony Flew. And I might have if there wasn't something that happened that changed all of that, because in 2004, Anthony Flew, who really was one of the kind of the great atheists. He was an English philosopher. He was a famous unbeliever long before anybody ever heard of Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett or Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris. They'd heard of Anthony Flew. But in 2004, he became a Christian, or at least said he believed in God. I'll be more honest and say he became a theist at least. And that was striking for everyone because you sort of have this sense that once an atheist, always an atheist. Once a skeptic, always a skeptic. And, of course, you talk about that in the book. And that's significant as well in terms of how, as he began to look at the evidence and the arguments, some of those for intelligent design, some of the philosophical arguments, he began to rethink something he had dedicated his life to, didn't he?
He did, and he was honest. He looked at the universe and the cosmos, and he came to the conclusion that it was just impossible for life to arise from lifelessness, that the chances of even the most elemental life arising from some sort of primordial soup were so astronomical that he couldn't believe it. Not only has order come from chaos, and life come from lifelessness, but mind and consciousness has come from non-consciousness. And he, as an atheist, could no longer accept that. He said he just couldn't. He realized that those are much greater miracles than any of the Gospels report. And like an honest man, an honest, rational thinker, he said there must be a God. There must be someone. This beautiful universe of incomparable harmony and beauty and order must have come from somewhere. And so, yes, he became a believer. And, of course, the atheist promptly
yes,
called him all kinds of names.
Yes.
And threw a hissy fit.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as we're coming to a conclusion, it kind of brings us back to Romans 1, because, some of the atheists I've interacted with, some I've debated, some I've gotten to know, some we've driven together to a radio debate or whatever, they all sort of imply that, if it weren't for you religious people teaching this religious doctrine, basically atheism would be the default setting. And yet they have a real problem with that, Anthony, because, we got 2 billion people that call themselves Christians. I don't believe all of them born again, but nevertheless, 2 billion call themselves Christians, 1.6 billion call themselves Muslims, another billion Hindu, Buddhist, another billion probably animists. We're a very religious world, and I think it goes back to Romans 1, where it says that as we look at the creation, we see evidence in the creation of a creator. And so in order to hold to atheism, you have to suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And I think that's really kind of the theme of your book, isn't it?
It certainly is. Atheists are so arrogant. They believe that the vast majority of all peoples everywhere from all time periods are wrong about the thing that's most important to them. That's arrogance. We have a deep inner need to believe in our Creator and Redeemer, and the evidence is all around us. And to deny it, you really do have to willfully deny it.
If somebody wanted to get some more information about this book or about some of the other children's books, and again, like you said, I would recommend The Donkey No One Could Ride or some of the others that would be fun children's books. Or again, as we've mentioned before, The Travel Guide to Life, Travel Guide to Heaven, Angels All Around Us, and some of those. We have a link to your website. And one more time, tell us what we find when we land on your website.
You find all my books, all 17 or 18 of them, and some videos as well, and a bunch of fun things.
Well, you also have a contact point there. If somebody'd like to have you come and speak on this book, or maybe do a series, or maybe they would like to schedule you for another radio interview or something like that, that's possible too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Just go to the website. There are contact people there for media as well as speaking. Everything that you need is right there, AnthonyDeStefano.com.
Well, I appreciate you being on with us. Congratulations on the new book, and don't take all those critical comments they say about you to heart, but that comes with the territory, and believe me, as somebody even older than you and have slugged it through some of these university classrooms and writing some books, I understand only so well what it's like when you just say, really? They said all this about me? They really don't even know me. They said this about the book. They haven't even read the book. So again, thanks for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. But again, if you find yourself saying, I would like to know a little bit more about this, we have those links on the website. First of all, take that article. It's only 2 pages long. It's very readable, and you could then maybe post it on your Facebook page, or maybe you have a website that you'd like to post it on, or maybe you'd like to pull some quotes out and use it in a Twitter post or something like that. Those are all certainly ways in which you can use that. The book's just coming out. It's published by Thomas Nelson. Always, we encourage you to go to your local bookstore and try to get it there first. And if they don't have it, you can just ask them to order it. I'm sure it'll come in. But if you don't have a bookstore nearby and you would like to get it, or maybe you'd like to just put it on Kindle and start reading even before the program ends right now, you can certainly do that as well. And we have those links on our website, pointofview.net. If you find some of the conversation we've had here about the new atheist important, I might mention that we have many other articles on this very important topic. You can find them at pointofview.net. And as you go there and find all these articles and resources, can I also ask you maybe to click on that button that says donate? That's a way in which you could help us financially, and we would certainly and greatly appreciate your participation in this as well. Matter of fact, I might do a booklet in the future on arguments of the new atheist, and so if you sign up to be part of our truth team, you'll receive that in the mail free of charge. So just a lot of great resources, and all that comes by making a donation to Point of View. Let's take a break. We got more to come right after this.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we want to spend some time talking about this new book, Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA, and what it taught me about what's worth fighting for. You know that we've talked about the Middle East, we've talked about its prophetic significance, we've talked about some of the geopolitical issues, we've talked about the plight of Christians in that region, we've talked about ISIS. So in some respects, this particular interview will pull that together. And by the way, if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. The book is just out, and we have information about it on the website. It is available both on hardcover and in Kindle. And again, you can look for it in your local bookstore. It's been published by Tyndale, and I think you will find it to be quite interesting and gripping. And let me, if anything else, do a service by introducing you to the author. Michele Rigby Assad is the former undercover officer in the National Clandestine Service of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. She has worked in Iraq and other Middle Eastern locations, which we won't mention. And she and her husband, Joseph, also a former agent, began leading teams to aid Christian refugees, including a rescue mission, I might mention, to Iraq, which was featured in ABC's 2020. She's a fellow graduate of Georgetown University, Go Hoyas, and also has served as an international management consultant and joins us now by phone. Michele, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I'm really happy to be with you.
Let's, if we can, tell the listeners how you ended up at the CIA. It's kind of a fun story because, you know, being in graduate school, I was at graduate school at Georgetown, one of my graduate degrees is there, and I recognize exactly how that developed. You've said, oh, well, there's an opportunity to work in one of these agencies, and you really never grew up thinking of yourself as a spy, did you?
Not at all. So I grew up in rural Central Florida, and growing up, I wanted to be a ballerina or a rockette or something of that nature. So, but when I was in high school, I went on my first mission trip after I graduated high school, and that mission trip to Egypt to work in an orphanage just changed my life. And so I eventually just kept following this passion to understand foreign cultures, which took me to Georgetown, as you mentioned. And at Georgetown, I basically applied to every possible job opportunity there was and was terribly surprised to get a call from a CIA recruiter saying they were interested in me.
Well, and again, for a while, it didn't look like that was going to happen. So fill in the rest of the story because it's kind of intriguing how that unfolded.
Right. So initially when they called, they said, we want you to be an analyst in the CIA. And I said, okay, great. And went through the very long process to get into the CIA, which includes background investigations and polygraphs and all these really difficult, long interviews and things like that. Right before I was supposed to start that job, Kerby, I was told I no longer met the requirements of the position.
Yes.
And the CIA withdrew its offer. And it was incredibly painful and incredibly shocking. But what I did not know at that time was that God wanted me in a different place, and eventually got into the other side of the CIA that was actually the operations side.
Right.
But had I started work as an analyst, I could have never been an operator in the field, and I could have never switched positions. So it was one of those moments, you know, where you look back in your life and you see that rejection can be God's greatest blessing to you, where he knocks you off the wrong path and often to get you on the right path.
Well, and again, it shows a little bit of the fallacy of the Tom Clancy novels, because you got the Jack Ryan films. They've got two different people that have played that, and now you have a third one coming out as well. And it's an analyst that then goes out into the field. That doesn't happen very often, but I have read part of your book where you do get that very thin envelope, and it says, "We don't need you," but it turns out that they found you somewhere else. Before we get any further, though, one of the other things I thought was intriguing is tell us about your husband, Joseph. I mean, you were down in Florida. You were a cheerleader, for example, which is why one of the things you thought maybe I'd be a ballerina or a rockette or whatever. But also, you were hearing from him some stories that also interested you in terms of the Middle East. Talk about that.
Yeah, so Joseph is originally born in the Middle East, born in Lebanon, but grew up in Egypt, and he is a Christian, and his family, they're Christians. He's not a convert from Islam. And a lot of people don't know how many Christians there are in the Middle East, and Egypt has one of the largest populations of Christians, worldwide in Muslim-majority countries. So he had to come to the United States to get his education when he was told that he was basically being too Christian in his activities and his parents' ministry. So he basically got kicked out of college. And a church in Central Florida heard about what happened to him and ended up working with a college in Florida and got him a full tuition scholarship to come to the United States and get his education. He was very grateful for that.
Well, for sure. Let's talk about the Middle East. And I might just mention that you do talk about the fact that the CIA gave you clearance on the manuscript. So if you occasionally say something, you are actually cleared to do so. And if you obscure where that takes place, that is the case as well. And I think our listeners will understand that only so well. But first of all, if you just joined us, talking about this new book coming out, Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. And I mentioned as we began the real concern about the plight of Christians, especially as they began to be affected by ISIS, and how there were symbols put on the homes, and there was a great danger to those. And so you were there in the midst of some of that. Can you explain?
Right. So we were actually working in Iraq for the CIA when so much of the sectarian cleansing was going on between Sunni, Shia, and, of course, everyone against the Christians. And it really was so frustrating. As you can imagine, here you are working for the U.S. government. You see that this intense persecution is going on, and there's nothing you could do in that job. But later on, God opened the door after we left the CIA to help Christians who were displaced from their ancient villages in northern Iraq, who had fled to Kurdistan and said, we can no longer, basically do this anymore. We've been chased out of our homes. Can you help us find a safe haven? And so Joseph and I, with this incredible skill set, with this knowledge of diplomacy and counterterrorism and operations, we're able to find a country willing to take these people. And it was this huge operation, which took place in December of 2015, where we airlifted 149 Christians out of Kurdistan and took them to their new homes in Slovakia.
So, again, just an incredible opportunity. We'll take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into a little bit more of that. And the hope that many of them might be able to come back. Of course, there are the refugee camps and so many other issues that we can talk about. But it's all part of this book, Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. Michele Rigby Assad with us, and you can find out more about her as well as about this new book that would be available to you. Certainly, I would encourage you to go to her website, which is Michele Rigby Assad. You don't have to know how to spell all that. We have a link there, .com, and it will give you more about this book. It will give you some other resources that you will find helpful. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with her, and we'll also take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the opioid crisis is getting worse, but there is also good evidence that solving this crisis will require careful strategies because the problem is more complex than many might imagine. First, let's look at the crisis. Americans are showing up in emergency rooms from opioid overdoses in record numbers. According to the CDC, suspected opioid overdoses increased by 30% from July 2016 to September 2017. But as soon as you look at the statistics in various states, you see how complex this issue is to solve with a simple solution. For example, prescription opioids are driving the epidemic in some states. In other states, illicit opioids are driving the epidemic, and in a few states, it is both. That is only part of the complexity. Opioids, when used correctly, can be highly effective pain medications. They can make the difference between a functional life and a dysfunctional life. Jacob Sullum writes about how doctors are tired of the scrutiny and have booted all of their opioid patients and relegated them to a pain-racked existence. His article in Reason magazine challenges the current perception that the use of opioids always leads to addiction and death. He explains that opioid-related deaths do not usually involve drug-naive patients who accidentally get hooked while being treated for pain. Instead, they usually involve people with histories of substance abuse and psychological problems who use multiple drugs, not just opioids. He argues that we should not conflate the two groups, opioid addicts and patients using opioids responsibly under a doctor's care. We need wise and careful policies to both treat the epidemic, but also help patients dealing with chronic pain. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Now playing. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Michele Rigby Assad, Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. We also have a link to MicheleRigbyAssad.com, which is her website, and you can see a couple of things there when she was on with Megyn Kelly, A Southern Belle to CIA Spy. That was a good piece, as well as, of course, the 2020 special on escaping ISIS. Talk about that for just a minute. Again, being able to rescue those Christians. There is a sense in which the attack of ISIS and the displacement of some of those individuals in the Nineveh plain and those who then were able to get to Kurdistan and eventually you were to move them elsewhere is still a great threat, but not the threat that it was before. But what about that, and how were Christians actually dealing with this incredible threat from ISIS and even the sectarian violence that was taking place there in Iraq?
Yeah, so I think that what a lot of people don't know are how many Iraqis have been refugees, have been uprooted from their communities numerous times. And so for a lot of them, being uprooted from Nineveh Plains wasn't the first time it had happened. We met people who originally fled from Baghdad or Mosul, and so they had been displaced multiple times. If you can imagine your whole family and your whole life being uprooted and losing everything that you have. And so they basically said, we can no longer do this. Can you help us get out? But if you recall, in 2015, that was the summer of the great migration of people just spilling over the shores into Europe from every direction. And so the hard part was trying to find a country that said, sure, we want to take more refugees. We don't have enough already.
But you were able to do that. Talk about that, because that is part of that special that was on ABC's 2020, and I would encourage people to watch that. And again, we also have some links so that you can maybe put some of those on your Facebook page, or you could send it to some other individuals. Could be a good way not only to educate people, but also to give people an idea that this new book is out. But what exactly was required? Can you give us some of the behind the scenes of how that happened?
Sure. So one of the key things, Kerby, we knew that if we were going to go and approach like foreign governments at the level of the president, prime minister, or minister of interior, we were going to have to say, okay, we've already met with all the people that we want to help, and we can assure you without a doubt that we're not going to bring in anyone who's ISIS posing as a Christian or, a needy refugee.
Right.
So we first had to go to Iraq and had to meet and vet these individuals ourselves, my husband and I. Well, thankfully, we had the perfect background for that, because in the CIA, one of the key parts of your job is to be able to vet people and information in order to make sure you're getting the truth of what's really happening. And so it was just right up our alley. It was perfect. And we were able then to approach numerous governments and say, these people are needy and they really are Christians, and there are no criminal elements or terrorist elements hiding amongst them. So that was a key piece of what we were doing.
And again, that's a good place where God used your background and experience in a way that the rest of us, we would want to help, but we would have no idea how to help. Go ahead.
Right, exactly. I mean, God creates tools for very specific purposes, right? And then we were basically trying to figure out who to approach, because we kept getting rejected by various countries saying, no, we can't take any more. And then we read in the Washington Post an article that said Slovakia was willing to take Christian refugees, but they haven't been able to find the right group to do that with. And my husband and I looked at each other like, oh my gosh, we've got to go to Slovakia.
Yes.
And thankfully, having worked in a bureaucracy, having worked for the U.S. government, and having worked in diplomacy, we kind of understood how to approach this country and how to go about asking this question. And it was amazing, Kerby, that after a couple of months of meeting with high-level government officials, they actually said yes.
Yes. Well, and again, I would encourage people to watch the special, because there you can see them getting on the buses, you can see them getting on the plane, you can see them crying, just the opportunity. Just imagine if what you owned was left behind, and what you could pack in a suitcase is all you could take to a country. And it just illustrates, again, some of the things that these Christian refugees faced. And part of the problem, and Michele, you may or may not want to speak to that, I certainly have, there have been problems when we brought these refugees over. Lots of times the Christian refugees didn't count, at least under the old administration and some of the bureaucratic rules. So in some respects, you were providing them a haven that even the United States wasn't necessarily providing them. True?
That's correct. In fact, we knew from statements that the administration had made that they were not going to open their doors and take Christians necessarily, because it would be giving them preferential treatment. Now, here's the part that a lot of people don't understand. I think we're pretty clear that ISIS is terrible to minorities, Yazidis, Christians, and all of that. But what people don't understand is what it is like to live your life when you're in a minority in a Sharia-dominated country. You don't have rights. And so what it's like to live as a Christian, so like when my husband was kicked out of college, where is he going to go and what is he going to do? There's nothing he can do to say, hey, this is wrong, I've been wronged here, because according to Sharia law, he's not equal. In Sharia law, there's Muslims and there's non-Muslims, and you only qualify for its protections if you're Muslim. And so if you're something else, it's not like the United States where you have a Bill of Rights or you have different various organizations you can go to or agencies for help. And so what they were saying is we don't want to give them preferential treatment. And what we're saying is, well, they actually need it, because life in general before ISIS was hard enough on its own.
For sure. One of the things that we make available here are these booklets for those of you that are donors. One of the first ones we made available earlier this last year was one on a biblical view on Sharia law. And it just as a reminder that this is not something that is good for all sorts of individuals. Muslims have more rights than non-Muslims. Frankly, as you would know, Michelle, men have more rights than women, and all sorts of things. So that is one of the dangers of Sharia law. Well, I wanted to only keep you here for a couple more minutes, but maybe in the future we can do a long and very extensive interview. But I did want to, for just a minute, talk about why you wrote this book and how you want to educate people. We have, over the years here at Point of View, tried to raise funds to help Christians that are in these refugee camps and to encourage others to reach out to refugees that might come to this country. But as somebody who has been at the very forefront of helping some of those Christian refugees be able to leave this very dangerous area where they found themselves to a new country, what would you recommend for us? How can we begin to benefit those individuals who are Christians in these Muslim-dominated countries, and especially some of those who have had to escape because they've been one step ahead of ISIS?
Yeah, so it's really tricky right now because the Catholic Church is providing a lot of support for those. Most of the people who are uprooted in northern Iraq cannot go back because ISIS has completely destroyed the infrastructure. And these people are willing, Kerby, to go back to just about anything, but it's actually completely unlivable. So it's going to require a huge infusion of cash and resources to rebuild these ancient communities and allow these people to leave refugee camps and go back to where they came from. So I always say if you're looking to support organizations like that, it sounds like you're providing a great venue for that, which I very much appreciate. And the other thing is,
let's talk about you too, because you also are able to speak for live audiences, for television and things of that nature. So you can be a resource for some of the churches listening right now, and maybe some that would want to have a conference or something where they could invite you to come and speak.
Absolutely. Love to do that. Love to educate people. And I love that Americans are so generous and they want to learn, they want to understand. And the extent to which that I can help facilitate that, I would love to do that.
And I might also mention you even provide stuff for businesses and sales. I love some of it. What dealing with terrorists taught me about business. I love that line here. Going undercover, finding your purpose in a dangerous world, my advantage as a woman in the CIA, and a couple of others. So there are just some great ways which people can connect up with you. And that's one of the reasons why we not only have the website, MicheleRigbyAssad.com, but also the book, and it is now out. And again, people probably can find it in their local bookstore, but they can they get a copy of it from you as well?
Yeah, for me, wherever you normally buy books, you can find Breaking Cover. Yes.
Well, again, hardcover and Kindle, and just wanted to, if nothing else, give you an opportunity to hear a little bit more about this book. And I have heard about it, and we'll do maybe a more extensive interview in the future. But Michele Rigby Assad, it's been great to have you on the program. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Kerby. Thanks so much.
When we take a break, we'll come back and take some of your phone calls. So some of you would like to address a variety of issues we've discussed here today on Point of View. Also today, the Supreme Court hearing oral arguments on a case that is going to affect, I believe, many of the pregnancy resource centers around the country. So I wanted to give you a brief overview to that, as well as give you an opportunity to express your opinion. An open line in this last half hour. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We've talked with Anthony DeStefano about Inside the Atheist Mind. We've talked with Michele Rigby Assad about Breaking Cover. And I wanted in just a few minutes maybe give you an update on the firing of Andrew McCabe. And we'll be back right after this.
From PureFlix comes God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Even in life's darkest valleys, a small flame can light the way toward healing and hope.
We are called to be a light in the darkness.
Starring David A.R. White and John Corbett.
God's Not Dead.
God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 30th. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
Christians are called to have answers. Answers for those who doubt our faith and answers for those going through difficult times. Thanks to our Truth Team members, Point of View provides those answers. You can play a vital role in bringing truth to the pressing issues of our day and truth when life doesn't seem fair. Help shine a light in darkness by giving today. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Do not miss or minimize how much of a difference you can make. Take just a couple of minutes and join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Kerby Anderson. Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head first to Indiana. And Larry, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. Being retired military myself, I wanted to call just to thank this young lady, this Michele Rigby Assad, for writing this book. I think one of the main points of this book is to enlighten the people of the United States and elsewhere. Some of the things that the CIA are involved in. Oftentimes, people look on the CIA and cherry pick a lot of missions that they're involved in and put them in a negative light. It's clear here that the CIA, these two individuals in particular, went about doing the job. They did it quietly, and they were successful. And I think it's very important that we know some of the missions that the CIA is involved in. And I congratulate her. I hope that she'll continue in whatever capacity to help people, Christians throughout the world. And this book is the first step. That's about it.
Well, thank you. And I might just mention that oftentimes I get a chance to read an entire book. This time I got some copies of the introduction, the first chapter, and so I wanted to cover some of that, but I wanted to get into the book a little bit more and then learn all the things that I can about her and her experience, watch some of the videos, and maybe we'll bring her back for an even more lengthy interview. And Larry, you probably will have the opportunity to share that with her as well. But I did want to let you know of a couple of books that have just come out. One, of course, we mentioned in the first hour, Inside the Atheist Mind, Anthony DeStefano, and that is just out today, turns out. And I've been reading what is called an advanced reader's copy. And then Michele Rigby Assad's book, which is out apparently, and I've got some copies of some of the PDF files, so that gives me a chance to at least read some of that, and we will probably bring her back a little bit later so that you can hear the rest of the story. But I thought, if nothing else, it would be a good read, and we want to thank her for her service as well as the service of her husband in the CIA. Let me, before we run out of time here today, mention a very important case before the Supreme Court, and it involves compelled speech. It's amazing how many times this particular session of the Supreme Court we're talking about compelled speech, because you can think that that is the case, of course, with the baker, Jack Phillips, out of Colorado, not to mention some of the others that are going to be affected by this, that said, well, you have to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding even if you disagree. And, of course, that also affects florists and photographers and innkeepers and all the rest. Well, this one on compelled speech basically says that the state of California has the right to tell pregnancy resource centers, oftentimes called crisis pregnancy centers, that they have to post certain information about themselves. Now, the other day we posted a piece by George Will, and I will quote from that in just a minute. But for those of you that wonder why we're bringing it up, it's because the oral arguments today are being given and have been given before the Supreme Court. And one of those individuals who is bringing those oral arguments is a good friend of this ministry. His name is Michael Ferris. He is now a lawyer that works with the Alliance Defending Freedom, and he will actually argue the case, which is called the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates against Becerra, before the Supreme Court. And, of course, his organization represents that National Institute, and that is one that provides legal counsel to pro-life pregnancy centers, such as the one called Informed Choice across the country. Now, the piece that we posted yesterday by George Will, I think, does a good job of summarizing it, because he says that crisis pregnancy centers are nonprofit facilities, usually owned and operated by people with religious objections to abortion. Now, let me hasten to add, whether they're religious or not, this is not really so much a religious freedom case as it is a free speech case, because, as he points out, some of the centers are licensed, and that means that they're licensed medical facilities. That means they have pregnancy testing, they have ultrasound examinations, they usually have a doctor on duty or at least a nurse on duty. They have medical referrals, prenatal vitamins, all those kinds of things. Then others are unlicensed, and they provide sort of non-medical services like a self-administered pregnancy test or parenting preparation training, baby clothes, diapers, you name it. And those of you that have worked in a pregnancy center In fact, I'd love to hear from some of you. 1-800-351-1212, know all about that. Well, it turns out that in 2015, California required this, that if it was a licensed center, they had to provide free advertisements for government-provided abortions. And then for unlicensed centers, as George Will points out, they had to say, I love this, in large fonts, in as many as 13 languages, even on their own websites, that they do not have medical providers that the government itself says by not required them to be licensed and are not necessary for the services they provide. And, of course, the situation, of course, is to completely do what they can to provide what is oftentimes said as free information or complete information. But again, they only target crisis centers. You know, this is certainly not to actually allow any other women's health services that dispense abortifacients to do this. These are groups that are compelled to actually promote something they disagree with. And think about this for just a minute. If you're a pro-life entity, you're not really interested in promoting that there are abortions down the street. You're interested in promoting life and actually meeting women at the moment of what they think is a crisis pregnancy and actually sharing with them that there are alternatives. Now, the Ninth Circuit Court, in its inscrutable wisdom, I love how George Will puts it, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, whose reasoning is frequently novel and whose rulings are frequently reversed, I should say, upheld California's law on the ground that government often can regulate the practice-related speech of professionals it licenses. But I love what George Will does, and I do this in a column that will come out next week, and I noticed that Penedextra also wrote a column about this that will be out this weekend, and it is to turn it around. He says, imagine if in maybe some other state, he says, suppose a pro-life state, could be Texas, or it could be Illinois, or it could be Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia, whatever, you know, that a state government were to require all publicly and privately funded abortion providers to advertise on their premises the locations and services of crisis pregnancy centers. First of all, it's hard to imagine that that would be done, but just imagine, you know, if that were to be done. Or he says, imagine if these pro-life states were to require them to provide accurate information on their premises, on their websites and their advertisements, something like this. And this is what George Will wrote. 18 days after conception, the unborn baby's brain begins to form. At 3 weeks, the heart begins to beat, circulating the baby's blood. At 6 weeks, brain waves are detectable. And at 7 weeks, the baby is kicking. By week 9, the baby can suck his or her thumb and move his or her head. From weeks 10 through 13, bones harden and teeth, fingerprints, and fingernails begin to form. At 26 weeks, the spinal cord and pain receptors are in place for pain transmission to the brain. In other words, the babies would feel pain. You can imagine the howl that you would hear from these pro-abortion groups about this, and yet everything he just mentioned is historically and medically and scientifically accurate. But again, the point is that they would never put up with that. So will it be possible that the Supreme Court will rule that this compelled speech of California is constitutional? I would hope not. And I hope, if nothing else, maybe Michael Ferris or somebody else points out, just imagine if we were to reverse this and actually say that every abortion clinic had to advertise the locations of pregnancy centers and actually advertise all this medically accurate information before a woman were considered an abortion. You know that the pro-abortion, pro-choice groups would not put up with that. So that's what this case is all about. It is argued today, of course, before the Supreme Court. There will be a time before it actually is resolved, but the impact that it has on the pregnancy center known as Informed Choices and the impact it could have on many of the other pregnancy centers is significant, so we'll be watching this case as well. Tomorrow, we probably will, in our Millennial Roundtable, might get into it. I'm almost certain that we will get into it on Friday because we'll have Kelly Shackelford with us, we'll have Penna Dexter with us, and we'll get into it a little bit more. But I thought it would be important for you to know about this case before the Supreme Court today. And if nothing else, one of the things I've begun to notice many of the pregnancy centers are doing is encouraging you to pray about the decision that will be rendered by the 9 Supreme Court justices. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to talk about, but if you'd like to join us, maybe you have some comments about pregnancy centers in your community or the issue of abortion, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. News out of Alaska reports that officials on the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly are thinking of ending their practice of prayer prior to their meetings. Assembly member Sean Tackey has said that the move to end pre-meeting prayer is to be inclusive. Since some of the community believe in prayer before meetings and others don't, he says, quote, having a strict policy of separation of church and state excludes no one and includes everyone, unquote. I'm not sure that's the right logic. By excluding legislative prayer, the Assembly is excluding those who believe in such prayers while favoring those who insist upon strict secularity in the public square. To quote Justice Kennedy's majority opinion in Grease v. Galloway, government may not mandate a civic religion that stifles any but the most generic reference to the sacred any more than it may prescribe a religious orthodoxy, unquote. The Supreme Court of the United States has twice explained legislative prayers have a long history and tradition in our country, a tradition meant to lend gravity to the proceedings while acknowledging the role religion plays in the life of our nation. Legislative bodies like this assembly may choose to end their practice of legislative prayer, but they should understand that nothing in the history of our country or the doctrine of our Constitution compels them to do so. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again for just a few more minutes. Let me just pick up a few other issues that are certainly relevant. One of those is we've been hearing a lot in the news about the decision that came down on Friday by the Attorney General Jeff Sessions to fire the former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. And I mentioned a little of that yesterday, but I thought I'd come back to it because Gary Bauer talks about it in his Monday American Values end-of-day report. And he talks about the fact that left-wing commentators have been insisting that Donald Trump was responsible for Andrew McCabe's firing. He says this is beyond fake news. It is a lie. He says Andrew McCabe is responsible for the firing of Andrew McCabe. The Independent Office of Professional Responsibility determined that McCabe lacked candor during testimony before Congress and lied during interviews with the Inspector General's office. Now, I added that. He says basically the deep state speak for that is he lied, but they didn't actually say that. But he did. And it has been the determination of these career bureaucrats. The Office of Professional Responsibility, as one of the people that I quoted yesterday said, is very unlikely to suggest a firing of an FBI, especially deputy director. It's about as rare, as he said in one of his commentaries, as a 16th seed in March Madness knocking off a number 1 seed. Well, it happened last weekend, but it doesn't happen very often. And again, pay attention to the people that recommended this. It was not President Trump, wasn't even apparently Attorney General Jeff Sessions. It was the Office of Professional Responsibility, and that's led by who? Well, Candace Will, and she has been appointed to that position in 2004 by then FBI Director Robert Mueller. And the Justice Department Inspector General, whose report has yet to be released, it was appointed by President Barack Obama. So these are individuals that are not associated with Donald Trump or Jeff Sessions, who recommended that. And he goes on to say, speaking of lying, in his statement defending himself, Andrew McCabe may have implicated James Comey in his perjury. And it will be interesting to see, because James Comey is going to be traveling around with his book tour, but we'll see where that all goes. The second lie that was being promoted is that McCabe's firing was politicized. And, of course, you had some people, both Democrats and Republicans, saying that. But, again, this was not because of some kind of action from the president. If you go and dig into it a little bit more, you can see just the opposite was taking place. And then one other argument that was being made was that this was not fair to Andrew McCabe because he was fired just days before he would qualify for this very generous federal pension, because he could then retire at the age of 50. By the way, wouldn't you love to retire at the age of 50? That's not even something in most of our mindset. I passed 50 a long time ago. But nevertheless, the Weekend reported that Andrew McCabe may be worth about $11 million, and he made that on a salary of $162,000, which is Gary Bauer's reminder that sometimes there are some sweetheart deals that people aren't aware of. He says, well, maybe he did well in the stock market. I don't think so. And more importantly, we've also had some people that have suggested that maybe they would just hire Andrew McCabe for a few more days, some of the Democrats. But as Gary Bauer points out, look at what happened to Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who has not been charged with colluding with Russia, but was charged with the same thing, lack of candor when he was interviewed by the FBI. Now some people said maybe he didn't lie, but his legal fees basically have broken him and his family. I've heard that his house is maybe even up for sale and all the rest. But just imagine, again, if some conservative member or Republican member of Congress decided to hire Michael Flynn. Don't you know there'd be all sorts of hue and cry about that? But nevertheless, that's where we find ourselves. So as you watch the news, as you listen to it, as you watch it and read it and all the rest, just recognize that Andrew McCabe was recommended for being fired by the Office of Professional Responsibility, even though everybody wants to blame President Trump for that as well. Just before we close, though, I thought we'd end on an up note, and that is, I mentioned yesterday, but it's worth coming back to, that because of this incredible success of the movie I Can Only Imagine, which was expected to bring in, I don't know, about $3 million, instead brought in $17 million. This has been good news for the Irwin brothers. That would be John Irwin and Andrew Irwin. This already made back the amount they invested in the film in the first day, and it's going to go on to do very well. And, of course, Heaven is for Real had a better opening, $22 million, but since then we are seeing some successes. But also in the IndieWire, which is written actually by non-Christians, they're starting to pay attention to the fact that we're now starting to see all sorts of other films. Of course, Heaven is for Real, War Room did fairly well, but now there's a whole series of others that are going to drop. This weekend, for example, you have Sony Columbia Pictures arm will release its historical drama, Paul, the Apostle of Christ. Now, I Can Only Imagine showed up in about 1,600 theaters. This one's only going to show up in about 1,400, which is still not a huge rollout, but I suspect that it will do well, and I would encourage you to go to that as well. I think it'll do well for a couple of reasons. First of all, Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus on the, of course, in the Passion of the Christ, will play his close companion, Luke. And the person that plays Paul, of course, will be James Faulkner. So you have James Faulkner playing Paul. You have Jim Caviezel playing Luke. I suspect it's going to do very well as well. And in the first hour, we were talking a little bit about God's Not Dead. There's a new Pure Flix film coming out, God's Not Dead, A Light in the Darkness. And this is the third film in that series about Christians who have faith challenged. And this one has to do with the fact that the entire congregation is struggling after its church burns down. The first film did very well, $65 million in total ticket sales with a slim budget, about $2 million. And so we're going to see how in the next couple of weeks here, how many of these films do. God's Not Dead 2 brought in about $25 million against a $5 million budget. So it is going to be interesting to see. And as we've said on this program so many times before, take the time to go to these movies. And that is sending a signal to Hollywood that we're looking for more of these faith-based films. And as I pointed out yesterday in one of the hours, some of the research done by Movie Guide, that's our good friend Ted Baer, found that those films which had either a faith-based element or at least had a redemptive kind of belief in truth kind of element, they did extremely well, more than $50 million per film. When you looked at those which are maybe more neutral or maybe didn't have any kind of faith-based element, maybe about $10 or $11 million, when you looked at those which were actually hostile to Christian faith and promoted humanism or atheism, like our conversation an hour ago with Anthony DeStefano, they made about $1 million. And, of course, we know Hollywood loves to do some of these art-based films and do those so that they get the accolades of some of their supporters and some of their filmmakers and maybe get some awards through the Academy. But the dirty little secret out of Hollywood is the films that actually cater to you, the listener's point of view, to faith-based audiences or people that are just middle America, those do very, very well, those G and PG rated films. And I hope that you will support these films. And if you haven't been to I Can Only Imagine, I would encourage you to go to that one. And if you would like to go to Paul, the Apostle of Christ, it's coming out this weekend. And those are some things we oftentimes promote here on Point of View. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we've covered here on Point of View today, it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. You'll find information about both of the books inside the Atheist Mind breaking cover. And as you go there, I hope you'll also click on the button that says Donate. We are dependent upon your financial gifts to bring these programs to you every single day. Millennial Roundtable tomorrow. Looking forward to that. Andrew and Stephen, thanks for your help. We'll see you back here on Point of View tomorrow.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.